You're listening to XVGM Radio. Welcome to XVGM Radio, where the bits keep coming. I'm Justin.
And I'm Mike.
And this is episode 38. Interview with Matt Creamer about Shakedown Hawaii.
We are super excited to have Matt Creamer, a.k.a. Norrin Radd, on the show. Matt is a buddy of mine back from the Pixel Tunes radio days on my previous podcast, and we had him on the show. We had a great time sitting around talking about music that inspired him, as well as music that he has written for various video games. And so if you haven't listened to that episode yet, go listen to it. Now we're going to be showcasing an entire soundtrack. Well, not the entire thing, but some of the hits, some of the best stuff out of this soundtrack that we loved in Shakedown Hawaii. So, Matt, thanks so much for joining us on this show on XVGM.
Happy to have you here.
Yeah.
Damn, happy to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. So, this game has been a long time coming. I think people have been waiting on it for a couple years now.
Really, that long?
Yeah. It's been a while. I mean, you got to think about it like this. Retro City Rampage, obviously the precursor to Shakedown Hawaii, came out in, what was it, like 2011?
2012, I think.
Was it 2012? Yeah, that makes sense.
2012.
Yeah, because it was one of the last games that came out on the Wii from...
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
It's been that long.
Jeez.
So we have been fortunate to receive quite a few gifts from V-Blank Games, from the developer of this, and also Retro City Rampage. And also Matt was courteous enough to give us some gifts, which we'll be giving away at the end of the show, sort of. We're basically going to give away some details, and so we want people to listen all the way to the end, so that way they can get the information for the giveaways.
You got to listen past the outtakes this time.
Yes, past the outtakes. So I guess we should start off with some brief history on you, Matt. Tell us, in your own words, what got you started in the video game music scene, or just how you started in general?
Well, if you want to go all the way back, it's 8 years old playing Mega Man 3. I'm like,
Nice.
damn,
Yes.
this game has some great music. Like, I love this music so much, I had to record it onto a ghetto blaster and play it in my bedroom loud enough to the point where my parents yelled at me from upstairs that I had to turn it down.
That's
so,
awesome.
it's already, I've already really I've committed at this point to video game music. But then it just became a hobby. When I graduated high school, I found out through Vert, Jake Kaufman used to release his chiptunes as module format files that you could open up in my case, Modplug Tracker. And I found out you can make your own Nintendo music that way. And so I started doing that just as a hobby. But my main thing was playing guitar at the time.
Right.
And I used to do like guitar remixes of video game music. It was always video game music. So that was my main thing. But then the hobby, the fun thing was just making chiptunes and Nintendo music. And I basically did that as a hobby for long enough that when I started, it was the PlayStation 2 era. And no one was really looking for Nintendo music in their video games back then. It was like, everything's got to be orchestral because we finally have all this technology. It's got to be orchestral. And I remember family members going like, how do you make music for video games? I'm like, they don't want Nintendo music. It's not what happens. It's just a really niche thing, okay? Then it, if you do that long enough, eventually it becomes a thing that people want again. I got asked to make some music for Retro City Rampage from that, which is crazy. And that sort of snowballed everything at that point.
Having known your work, at least, not necessarily you, but having known your work for so long, I remember back in the day, this is going to feel like very like late night with Jimmy Fallon kind of, because I remember like, when he brings the guests on and then he's like, do you remember this really kind of like funny thing that you used to do, or the semi-embarrassing thing that you did like way back in the day? And they're like, oh man, you have that? It's like, I remember being like super into like OC Remix. Like I would, when I was in college, I would visit like all the time. And I remember listening to your Go Home and Be a Family Man remix of Street Fighter 2 of Guile's theme. And I remember looking at that and being like, who's this Norrin Radd guy? And then like years later, started seeing his name on like various different game soundtracks and being like, is this the same guy? Is somebody else using his name? And then I found out when I interviewed him, it was the same guy. And I was like, okay. All right. Awesome. Yeah. It's pretty cool. It's nice.
That's hilarious. On the topic of OCR, did you ever hear the Ninja Gaiden track I have on there?
No, I didn't.
It predates that Guile theme by about 2 years.
Oh, snap.
And the Guile theme was already like kind of a gong show. It was like the Wild West of home recording at that time. So I managed to scrape together just enough to make something sort of passable. But that Ninja Gaiden track, literally, I didn't even have a digital amp simulation. I'm going right from my guitar distortion pedal into my computer. So there's no amp sim. This is the worst sound you can possibly get. And I don't know why they accepted it.
That's
but that'll
so
be up. Check that one out after for I don't know why they even still have it up on the site. It's an embarrassment.
Kind of seeing you rise up in the ranks from doing these like cover songs of already like released like video games to then putting out your own soundtracks and stuff on like Bandcamp and stuff. It's really cool to see like where you've come with your compositions and with your music. So we're, like I said before, we're so happy to have you on the show. So the song that we brought in the episode on is the CEO's Return. That's the name of the track. And already you get a very different vibe from the previous Retro City Rampage, which was pretty much like Nintendo metal. And here you've got something that just feels very like sludgy, something that feels really like sewery and like slimy and evil. And that's the perfect description, because you're playing as these corporate guys that are just like looking to like ruin, like make money off of like the worst possible
any way they can.
So
Yes.
it's really cool that, I was just gonna say, it's really cool
it's
that you
a
were
good dark comedy, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like you were able to get these songs to kind of fit the mood of what's happening. So this song, it almost gives you like a hopeful feel too when that lead synth comes in, that dun, and then the dun dun dun. It's like a super like Miami Vice kind of feel.
I got sort of a bit of a Tron feel out of it, like late 70s, early 80s kind of synth, and just like, especially with that dun 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 dun, dun in the background. There's so many of the songs from Tron, even
like Tron Legacy, right?
I was going to say, even when Daft Punk did the soundtrack for Legacy, they tried to keep that classic sound in there and then just take it to the next millennium. Yeah. But I really dug that feel, that vibe of this opening track.
Very Stranger Things as well. Oh, I got a vibe of Stranger Things. Just that
same
80s dark wave synth.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. What inspired you with this one?
I'd say if I had to boil it down to just a couple of influences, it would be Blade Runner and Terminator 1.
Okay.
Nice.
Like the two soundtracks that I think of from the 80s that actually did use synth to its fullest. Like when you think about the 80s, there's always like, you think about synth, but when you go back and listen to it, like there's not necessarily something that's just synth. Whenever you find something that's just synth, like for me, I guess, because I like to overanalyze things, it's like I really enjoy when I find something that's just synth. Like for example, Madonna's first album, it's like nothing but synth. It's like synth and drum machine, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I read a funny anecdote that they're like, wow, this is too cold. Like everything is cold. That was kind of the description for synth, is like it's very cold feeling because there's no warmness to it. This is too cold, so they actually had to add in a little guitar going like, that's the only other thing.
The
like
Michael Jackson guitar.
Cold synth. Yeah. Blade Runner is not necessarily cold synth, but there's a lot of cold synth tracks in it. But Terminator especially is like one of the only albums from the 80s, like for a soundtrack, that is literally just synth from start to finish. And it's I like synth, and so it's just something I'm inspired by, period. And when we were starting out with this project, it was supposed to be Amiga sounding. That was because the first Retro City Rampage was Nintendo sounding, and so it makes sense to be like, all right, well, what's the console that we're sort of basing this one on? And Brian, the developer, was like, well, I kind of want it to sound like Amiga games because they have this really dark, gritty feel to them too.
Yeah.
And so when we started working on it in 2015, that was what we did. Like I downloaded all the Amiga sounds I could, and I was trying to make Amiga sounding music. And like shortly after we tried that, it's like you realize we can go down that path, but something about Nintendo, it's like so basic that you can go down that path and it can still sound really, I don't know, engaging. It's like if you were to boil down music down to just a simple tone, then it's just that, it's just a tone. But the more little bits you start adding to chiptunes, like say if it's a little bit of a guitar sample, if it's not an actual good sounding guitar sample now, it's really hard to pass it off to an audience. So like you can go all the way back where there's no guitar samples, or all the way to where there's real guitar samples, but in the middle, a lot of people are kind of like, this kind of sounds a little janky. So using those Amiga sounds, it was like, man, this is going to be hard to do a whole soundtrack that's like legit sounding like this. And it was just a funny throwaway. I sent Brian this one pulsing track. It might have even been from the CEO's Return. You know how the start is just that bump, bump, bump,
right,
bump.
right.
And there's just a classic thing that a lot of synth people do. When you ever see those guys that are on stage with the big synths that have all the knobs, and then the big trick is you're just turning off the cutoff. You're turning it down and turning it back up, and the cutoff is basically like removing high frequencies, so it sounds like
right. Yeah.
So if you do that really slowly to a pulsing synth, that's your Stranger Things sound. Like that's the exact same thing.
Exactly.
And so that's all I did. It was one note, and I just sent him a cutoff, like a filter sweep is what you'd call it, and sent it back to him. And I thought it was just going to be like I was at this point, I kind of wanted out of the Amiga constraints, so I was sending him everything at this point, and I didn't know what else to send, so I just sent him this one synth thing, and that was it. It broke his brain, it broke my brain, and from then everything changed. But we'd already written like 15 tracks for the game at that point that are all still in the game, so it's been a long, weird process, but I'm really glad that we did start going down the synth path, because it's something I'm super passionate about, and it's really easy to sort of keep, I don't know, the inspiration to do different tracks.
Oh yeah. You could totally hear it too. I mean, just in listening to the soundtrack, you could see where the passion's coming from for that. So now what I'd like to do is go ahead and move into our next track so we can continue kind of asking questions and talking about this awesome soundtrack.
Yeah, so let's take a quick break here. We'll give a listen to a little ditty called Beach Cruise, and then we'll come back, we'll talk about it and ask some more questions.
That's off the Shakedown Hawaii soundtrack from 2019.
By Matt Kramer, Norrin Radd. Welcome back. That was Beach Cruise from our highlight of the night, Shakedown Hawaii by Norrin Radd, also known as Matt Creamer, also known as I love the song. I really like the bounciness of it. I like how it kind of starts out dark, but it's not dark like minor tones or anything. It's just like it starts out really low and you don't know where it's going until the higher synths kick in. Then it's just like da 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 da.
Yeah, yeah.
Really, really bouncy.
I just love that initial like bass, like metal groove. It's such a banger, and then when that lead synth comes in, it's like, oh, we're at the mall all of a sudden, you know?
Exactly. That's funny to hear you guys mention the darkness of the soundtrack. Like, it's funny because I don't hear it until you mention it to me. And then I realized, like, that's kind of the problem I've always had with a lot of the songs that I've worked on in games. I like to write dark stuff. I just write dark melodies. Like, it's really hard for me, actually, to write anything that's in a major scale. Like, I don't hear the next note as a major note. It's always pulling me towards a dark sound.
Yeah.
This was a track where it was supposed to be, like, my inspiration for it was, like, a corporate training video.
Yeah.
Like, that's where, like, when that lead comes in, it's really, like, that was the thing. The developer and I, Brian, like, I kept using the word corporate with him, and, like, because the whole theme of the game is very corporate, and, like, it's the one point where they're doing, like, a pitch meeting where he's got, like, the projector screen up and he's showing all the stuff and, like, corporate sales. Like, it's just, but that, you're right. Like, there's something about that, especially in retrospect, that's just really dark. Like, it's like this weird dark era. Like, do you guys remember Scanners? Did you ever see the movie Scanners?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Like, that's the perfect example of, like, these are dark corporate, super clean things. Like, it's clean, but it's just dark, like corporate espionage, and Scanners basically took it to the maximum degree by, like, hey, we're gonna have a meeting where we make a guy's head explode. Like, that's like,
yeah.
It's taking this entire game and the soundtrack are taking a lot of like influence from 80s like Reaganomics and corporate. Yeah, just
definitely.
I think there's just like a lot of parody there. I mean, you've got stuff like RoboCop, which is obviously you know a pretty big thing about this. It's like, how scummy can these like corporate companies get, and how can they deliver to the public something that they think they want? There's just like such a huge influence on like marketing and consumerism that comes out of this game.
Yeah, and the thing I liked is that, you know, it's basically the main character is the 80s version of like corporate grossness, whereas the modern corporate grossness is kind of like the villain. And it's funny that you're cheering for a guy that he's still a bad guy, and he's basically like a Blockbuster CEO. Like, he wants to bring back the Blockbuster, you know, model. And funny to be cheering for that guy, and he sees himself as the hero too. So a song like The CEO's Return, for example, it does have like that heroic feel to it, but it's like, he's not a hero. He's basically Mr. Burns. He's not a great guy.
Yeah. It's like a jacked Mr. Burns.
Yeah, super jacked.
Yeah.
When we grabbed the game, we were playing it. I think I'm about maybe 2 hours or so deep into it. But at one point, Mike and I were discussing the game, and I was just like, I'm enjoying the game on most levels, but on a certain level, it makes me really uncomfortable. I'm just like, there's so many things that are just that are about this game that, like, things that you see in the real world. I'm just like,
a lot of injustice.
Yeah, like it's interesting to play a game like this, but at the same time, like, when you step out of the game and think about it in real world terms, you're just like, oh, what am I doing?
Well, okay, so
but you can't. I mean.
Dialing it back, like, in terms of time and thinking about it, in Retro City Rampage, which is the precursor to this one, which the developer Brian Provinciano worked on, he wanted to create like basically Grand Theft Auto on the Nintendo, right? And the character that you're playing as, it's this whole like bad guy meets like Back to the Future plot. Yeah. So it's kind of a parody on 80s video games and 90s video games, and just like 80s in general. It's more specifically about video games and like pop culture references and stuff like that. Whereas this is like if you took Grand Theft Auto and brought it to the corporate world. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's got a lot more influences from stuff that we've been talking about that, you know, so far in this episode. Miami Vice is a huge influence. It's like you're playing against the bad guys on a Miami Vice episode. It's a neat take on something like this.
So he's you know, he retires essentially, and he lets his business run himself to a point where like new business models come in and they start creating monopolies that he's unaware of. And so because he's an 80s like OG CEO, as soon as he comes to, and the reason that the modern sort of monopolies are the villain in this game is because they affect us right now. Yeah. So you can look at, sometimes they'll be like, you know, like the DLC sort of conundrum and like service model stuff and all that stuff. It bothers me too, like when I see stuff like that now, and that's what affects us now. So you see them as kind of jerks in the real world, whereas this guy's a jerk from the past. It's like, hey, those jerks can't like have all those customers. Those are my customers.
Yeah.
So he's just going to any nefarious means to kneecap these like modern day jerks for like his old school brand of like, just brute force this jerk, like, let's go.
Yeah, like
so it's you're right. There's no goodness in the game.
No.
And that's why it's funny when you have a track like Beach Cruise where it's like, this is so silly that like it, you know, if it weren't that silly, you know, and we do go dark. The game does have some dark moments for sure, especially in the music, and that's my fault. I can't not be dark. You know, a lot of the tracks that you guys have picked too, like there's some silliness to it that we really needed in the game to sort of balance that out. Oh,
for sure, yeah. There's some really dark stuff, which we'll talk about some of the examples of what you see throughout the game. We both haven't finished the game, but you said you're about 2 hours in. I'm like about maybe 3 or 4, maybe. I'm like 16% done with the game. Okay. It's a huge game.
It is.
It's way bigger. Like I was talking to Matt about this before. Like the game is huge. It's way bigger than Retro City Rampage, and it's almost like intimidating because you're driving around and you're like, wait a minute, I remember in Retro City Rampage I would drive around and I would just see the same, like, I don't know, 12 corners and be like, yeah, I know the map by heart now. But this game, it's like you're visiting new stuff all the time. Yeah. All right, so let's jump into our next track. This track is called Night Ride. Hey, welcome back. That was Night Ride. And boy, that was a night ride. I love the Turtles synth, as I like to call it. The synth hits.
Explain?
The synth hits.
Turtle. Okay,
Turtles.
I got you.
Turtles. Yeah. Yeah, the synth hit at the beginning there. The right shortly after.
Yeah.
You get that ride symbol that kind of brings you in. That ding da da. Ding, and then you get the turtle synth drops, the orchestral synth hits.
You said turtle synth, and I wasn't thinking of TMNT. I was just like, how does a synth remind you of a turtle? I don't even know what sounds a turtle makes.
I was gonna think you were gonna go with the Joshua Morse songs, the Turtles remixes that he does.
Oh, that's
because I know you're a big fan of Joshua Morse. It also kind of came to mind when I said it. It's like I was saying it and I was projecting what I wanted you to hear and think about, so you could be like, oh yeah, the Turtles synth hit. But anyways, yeah, so the synth hit kind of rolls through, and then you get this just really awesome 80s song. It's weird because all three of us grew up in the 80s. Like, we're all like 80s kids, like, you know, growing. Like, I was born in 83. You were born in what? 83, right?
And
Matt, when were you were 83? Okay, yeah. So we're all 83. So we all grew up in this weird era where, you know, you had all this like music that was on the radio. And so Matt, what he's done here is captured the music that you would hear on the radio or in like bars or in clubs or in malls. And like it's brand new music, but it's all like super retro. So to hear it again in such a fresh format is just really cool. It's different because it's out of a video game, but at the same time, I feel like Retro City Rampage was more like, hey, this is video game music. Like this is very clearly video game music. It's inspired by video game music, but here the music is definitely inspired by the 80s. So would you say that that's pretty accurate as far as, because I know you mentioned Terminator and you mentioned Blade Runner, which that was Vangelis, I believe, did the soundtrack to Blade Runner. So were you thinking of any other like specific 80s bands or groups when you were working on this?
Not specific groups or anything, but yeah, you're right. Spot on. It's 80s in general. You know, there's been a resurgence in 80s sort of aesthetic. You get the synthwave movement. I'm sure you guys have heard some synthwave stuff.
Yep.
If not, synthwave is basically vaporwave. I love a lot, but synthwave is basically like trying to make music that sounds like we remember the 80s, but not exactly like the 80s. So when you think about the 80s, you do think about more like synth and stuff like this track. But when you go back and listen to 80s, you're like, where's all the tracks were like that? And it's kind of hard to sort of suss them out. They're there, but it's not as prominent as you remember. So it's funny that coming out of the 80s, we remember these sounds more than we remember necessarily what sounds were more common, I guess. But yeah, that's exactly it. So when we were making the music for this game, there was at one point, I told you he wanted Amiga music at one point. And so throughout the process of us coming out with the game should sound like, he started peppering me with, and this was terrifying, he started peppering me with Bandcamp pages to synthwave artists. And they weren't like really popular ones. There was one called Mulperry that I've never heard of before or since, but he just randomly sent me this one Mulperry Bandcamp page. And as soon as I heard it, I'm like, damn, I don't know how to make that kind of music. And that was actually a wake up moment for me, because that was basically like 2016, 2015, where like I could make cinematic synth music, like stuff that has those large sweeping sort of synth pad sounds. But when it comes down to synthwave, the big thing with that is if you break down synthwave as a genre now, what makes stuff popular now in the synthwave genre is you have to be a good producer. You have to know how to make it sound really, really good. And that's how they make it sound like the 80s, but still sound good. Like if you make something sound just like the 80s, it'll sound not as big as it does as a modern stuff. So synthwave is all about being a master at knowing how to make something sound like we remember it sounding. So it's like using your HD memory, which is exactly what I kind of try and do when I was making other soundtracks, like Treasure Buster. It was a Sega Genesis soundtrack, but I didn't strictly follow the Sega Genesis sound guidelines. I wanted to make it sound like people remembered the Sega Genesis sounding, so I broke rules intelligently. That's what synthwave's all about. So anyways, he sent me this Mulperry track, and I'm like, I need to learn how to become a producer now, or else I can't figure this out. Because he was actually like, should I just license some music from this guy so we could get some more tracks in the game? I'm like, definitely not. Definitely don't do that. Hey, hold on. I'll make you a track. So it was like on the fly. I had to like learn how to make synthwave music. And it's something I've been putting off for a long time, becoming more of a producer, learning how to make my track sound good. So that was super stressful. But that was like lesson one of becoming a better musician and composer for this specific game. It was definitely like a coming of age story, but it was quick. It was like, do it now or else someone else is going to be on the soundtrack. That would just be just from an aesthetic standpoint, like you don't want necessarily more than one person on a soundtrack. Retro City Rampage had that and it worked out fine. And I was like the grunt on that soundtrack, so that was fine. But if I'm the main guy on a soundtrack, I definitely don't want someone else on the soundtrack. Just like it makes it harder to even break down who's gonna post the song on their Bandcamp, blah, blah, blah. It's just easier if it's one guy. So there was a lot riding on like become a producer now, learn how to produce music now. And actually I carry all of the lessons I learned from this game to everything I've made since it. And there's been like 7 or 8 soundtracks since this game.
Oh wow!
It's all the lessons I've carried forward. So it was
super big learning experience.
And screaming, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's kind of one of those things where it's like your back was against the wall, and it was like, hey, if I don't make this happen, then somebody else is going to make it happen for the developer.
Exactly.
So it's funny that you bring that up, because I wanted to ask you actually on Retro City Rampage. You had just mentioned this. You had 2 other people along with yourself. You had Vert, aka Jake Kaufman, and then you had
Freaky DNA.
Freaky DNA, that's his name. Most of the tracks were split between you and I would say Freaky DNA, and like Vert was kind of like the showstopper. Like people would like be like, oh, did you hear the soundtrack? Vert's on it, and these 2 other guys. But like when I heard it, I was like, oh, it's Vert and Norrin Radd and this other guy who I don't know. Like I just didn't know Freaky DNA. But the thing is, it's really weird. Like Freaky DNA's music is more like in line with I think what type of music he's really good at, which is like the more hip hop, the more like not metal chiptune stuff. Like his stuff was more groove oriented.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And Norrin Radd stuff was way more like, obviously, like chiptune metal. And same thing with Vert. Like, Vert's music was just insane. It was just like prog metal,
for sure.
you know, like thrash prog metal. And then Matt here jumped on and did the tracks that he did, and they were all just like super speedy, super fast, very Iron Maiden-ish. So how did you move from working with 2 other guys to working just by yourself? Like, how did that come about?
I think Brian just liked working with me, and I liked working with Brian, like, because when I got onto Retro City Rampage, he just wanted to license some of my existing chiptunes, and yeah, you can definitely license some chiptunes. I'd never heard of that at the time, so it was like, okay, well, sure, I guess you license my tracks. But I started looking at more of his game, and I realized, like, you might need, like, I almost saw it as like, oh, this is kind of my shot. Like, I liked making, I don't know if you guys have heard it, but I made an album called Melodia di Infinito. It's a chiptune album before Anomaly. It was the first chiptune album I put out.
Okay.
And that was an album where I was basically trying to write music for a video game that didn't exist, sort of.
Yeah.
So, well, if you break down Nintendo, there's always tropes to music. Like, there's the ninja song, there's the underwater song, there's the ice song, there's the fire song. And so I started just sending him my interpretations, like, you might need one of these, you might need one of these. And he saw the potential there, especially in the rock tracks, because I sent him Renegade as the first track that he didn't ask for. I just sent him Renegade, like, hey, do you think this would work in your game too?
Yeah.
And this was a fresh track, so he couldn't license it. And he's like, yes, that would work amazingly in the game. So that sort of set off our relationship. We work really well together. So when it came down to this game, Vert was, obviously, he's a marquee musician. He's like one of the most famous, like, video game people that came up sort of from my scene. He's the one everyone looked up to. He's the guy. But he's busy, and he's hard to, he's not hard to work with, but he wasn't as willing to, like, bend over backwards for any given project, because he's working on tons of projects all at once.
He's a busy guy,
and I get that. I've been there since. But Brian, I just felt a connection to the guy, and I wanted to keep working. And so I did a lot of music for Retro City Rampage for as cheap as you could possibly make music, because I wanted not only to get more of my music on the soundtrack, but I just wanted to make the game better. So I could see, like, you might need songs like this or songs like that. So it became easy for him to see, like, I can sort of fill in a lot of gaps.
Yeah.
Just as a creative person, like, you might need this, you might need that. So I guess I was the person he came to first for Shakedown Hawaii. I never really questioned it, but I guess it's just because we work together really well, and we've done a lot of conventions together, actually, for Retro City Rampage.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Let's move into our next track. What do you got for us, Justin?
All right. So coming right up, this is going to be Freeway Escape. Right, hey, that was Freeway Escape. That was pretty groovin'.
Yeah, no, I was really digging that. It had a very lighthearted feel to it in a way. I mean, I could still sense, like, kind of the darkness a little bit, but it felt a little bit more like desperation, almost as if, like, he's trying to escape. Like, this would be a good, like, escape song. I don't remember where this takes place in the game, but it feels like an escape song.
Yeah, it probably is. I don't know that I've gotten to where the song plays in the game yet, because outside of hearing it and choosing it, it's not familiar from what I've played, but I don't so much get desperation, but I get like nighttime, and maybe there's a similar feeling that you can sort of like cross between the two. But like the do 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 do, like that,
very starry-ish.
Exactly, that's exactly where I was going with that one.
Kind of spacey.
And then like the driving and the bass line, no pun intended with the freeway bit there, just makes me feel like driving at night. Like I accept the freeway piece of it, like you're just on the highway at night, like maybe you got the roof down or you got a moon roof up, and there's just stars, it's a clear sky, maybe you're getting away from the cops, who knows.
So what was your process in writing this one?
That was exactly it. We kind of broke down the game into a couple of flavors, and one of them was like driving music was a flavor, and this was kind of when we started to break the game into those categories. I definitely wanted this to be a driving track in the game, so there's just sort of a feel when you're cruising down the road in this game that you could be doing menacing things. You could be just like on the sidewalk mowing people down, or you could be crashing into police cars, or you could just be like just trying to get to a mission as fast as possible. There's just a feel to it. That was kind of what I wanted to do with this track, which is why I had a song title already planned for this one as I was writing, which is rare for me. That was basically the idea.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice. I'm glad we were on with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mission accomplished.
Yeah. It's interesting because listening to this, I don't know, like I have such nostalgia for the NES. And the sound chip specifically. Like pretty much any excuse that I have to listen to the NES, I'll take it. Even if it's like bad NES, I'll still listen to it. But it's like, I guess I felt so attached to the Retro City Rampage soundtrack. Like I recently got the actual soundtrack CD. A friend of ours on the podcast, Chris Murray, sent me the physical disc.
Yeah.
And so I've been listening to it in my car in preparation for this episode along with the Shakedown Hawaii tracks. And while I really like the Shakedown Hawaii soundtrack, there's something different about the absolute bangers that Matt wrote for the driving tunes.
Yeah.
And it's weird because while I'm playing Shakedown Hawaii, I'm listening to, like, I'm cycling through the radio while I'm driving around, and I'm like, man, where's, what's that song called? Like, Do or Die, I think it's called?
Do or Die.
Do or Die. I'm like scrolling through and I'm like, where is Do or Die? And I'm like, I know this is a different game, but it's a totally different feel.
Yeah.
So you can't really go into this one thinking, oh, it's like Retro City Rampage 2, because it's not.
No,
it's totally, I mean, like, I guess in terms of aesthetic, it's kind of similar, because it's like you're driving around, you're beating people up, you're, doing all that stuff, all the like really nasty, terrible stuff that you did in the first, the Retro City Rampage. But in this one, it's just the mood is different and the feeling is different, and that 80s aesthetic, it just bleeds through to everything.
Yeah.
And it's weird because it's like, it's not just an 80s game, like you're not playing in the 80s. It's almost as if like the 80s look never went away, and so you're playing as this like aging CEO that like, it almost feels like he woke up out of like a cryogenic chamber, and like he's still in an 80s mindset, and nothing has changed in his mind, but like all this stuff has changed. Like in the game, there's the internet, there's red box type stuff and all that. There's internet ads. There's one part of the game where he keeps getting these ads on his tablet for, what is it? It's like diarrhea medicine or something. I can't remember what it is.
Like prune juice.
Prune juice, yeah. He's getting this ads for like prune juice and stuff, and he's like, oh, what we should do is we should, figure out what's causing this or whatever. And they're like, yeah, no, it's ads, dude. Like, it's ads. Like, that's what's happening. So like, it's funny to see all the people that are either working for him or all these like third-party corporations that are like, dude, you need to get with it. And even his son, because you also play as his son.
And you play as a total of 3 people in this game.
Yeah, I know you play as the son, and you play as the son's name. The son's name is Scooter.
Yep.
And then you play as the main character, the CEO.
Yep.
And then you also play as, there's like a mercenary that the CEO kind of like hires to do like really like dirty stuff. It's like you go and you track down these dudes, and then you end up just like blowing up everything as this guy. It's like he sends him in, to do the really, down and dirty work. Not like the local stuff where like, he'll dress up, like he'll put a cap and a different shirt on or a different outfit, and then he'll go like bust up like a grocery store just to like start funneling money in through them, like an insurance thing, like collecting money.
Protection money. Yeah.
Protection money, yeah. So you literally go in, just like all those 80s movies where it's like, something bad will happen to you if you don't, get with the program, right? That type of...
Everybody usually is like, no, what are you going to do? And then you start like breaking the store, beating up their customers. Setting stuff on fire, and then they just throw their hands up like, no, I'll give you money.
Yeah. So
then you start getting income from their businesses. Right.
So that's just like a small snippet of like some of the really terrible things that you do, like just the CEO and your son's Scooter ends up joining this like gang.
Yep.
It's like this weird like kind of like southern gang, I guess is the only way. Like the dude shows up and he's in like overalls and like they're half on, and he's just like, yeah, I want you to go to this barbecue that my like brother-in-law is having and like blow everybody up. Like, what? This is like terrible. So it's just it's so slimy of a game in terms of like the actions and the things that you're doing, but at the same time like it's super fun. You know what I mean? Like, no, that sounds like terrible, but
it's like the GTA games. You think about what you usually end up doing in those, and some of the more recent games, there's a lot more sort of like political connotation to some of the stuff. But even just back in the day, it was just madness and mayhem.
Yeah,
and I feel like that's a big inspiration to everything that's going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so coming up next, we've got Jungle Mercenary. Speaking of mercenaries. And the subtitle on this one is fantastic. It's Please Adjust the Tracking. And again, this is off the Shakedown Hawaii soundtrack from Matt Creamer, aka Norrin Radd. Back, and that was such a good song. That was Jungle Mercenary, Please Adjust the Tracking, off of the Shakedown Hawaii soundtrack from 2019, released by Matt Creamer, aka Norrin Radd. We were talking a little bit during the break about this track and the weird VHS kind of style degradation, where almost like you can hear like some sort of like distortion going on with the sound to almost make it feel or sound like warbly. Can you tell me like...
that's exactly it.
Yeah. So you were mentioning earlier in the episode that this whole thing kind of made you change the way that you do video game music, or kind of the way you do music in general, by becoming a producer. So you had to figure out how to do this one. So when you were creating this track, what was kind of your thought process behind this one?
If you want to distill down like what I write when I'm not given any criteria or guidelines, this is very close to just like, you could sit me down on a computer and I would write this song for you really quickly with no hassle at all. Like the more stuff I have to think about, the harder it is for me to make a song. But this one is like core Norrin Radd. This is just what I sound like by default.
Yeah.
So all I really had in mind was I really wanted to make... I'm kind of obsessed with using old tones like the Nintendo lead that you kind of hear in this track, and running them through VHS distortion. It's just like everything I have to hear what does that sound like through VHS distortion? What does this sound like? And so I love the idea of taking these super brittle, really gnarly sort of core NES tones, like sharp, very sharp tones, and then just degrading them to crap and seeing what it sounds like. And I think it sounds really cool. So that was basically the only thing I had in mind. So default songwriting, check. And then what else? Some VHS distortion, and let's take it from there.
And that like bouncy ball bass line too, the boom 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 boom.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I really dig that. And that also sounds kind of warbly, no?
Yeah, the whole track, like you can toy with making it go across the whole track as just one instance, or you can have each individual track having different sort of degradation effects on it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of an art form into itself. Like, how do you make something sound just awful, but still like kind of this a good awful? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's more to it than putting up like there's some dedicated sound effects sort of suites that can do this sound for you, but like by and large they usually overdo it, so you kind of have to find this sweet spot. So you kind of have to know what you're looking for. Like not everyone might like the noise. Like there's a lot of things you can do where it has just like line noise in the background, which is usually not preferred at all. But there's that one transition in this track where I turned off the line noise for the whole track except for that one gap where there's nothing, and then I just have it ramp up really loudly so that it becomes the focus of the whole thing. So that was kind of why I added the please adjust the tracking to the song title, because some people might actually not know like that's a desired effect. Like they might just think, why is this guy's sound quality just so bad? Because I got that a lot with Anomaly, actually, which was the NES death metal album I wrote, and I recorded vocals for it, and I turned them all into 1-bit DPCM data streams, which is what they would have sounded like if they were on the Nintendo. And most people would say in the comments, like, this guy needs to get a better microphone. And they were serious. So, you know, hopefully I could assuage some of that just with a song title.
They're missing the point that it's intentional.
Yeah, no, I actually really like that. Like there's a, sort of like a lo-fi quality that it's not bad. It's just it's an interesting quality. Like it's part of the art of the music.
Part of the aesthetic.
Part of the aesthetic, yes.
Right. Now, I know that you and I have talked about this, Matt, regarding the release of the soundtrack, and you had a lot of difficulty with that process. You had mentioned that the sound quality itself was like intentionally bad because you were trying to go for a specific effect. But when it comes to the actual soundtrack itself and releasing the soundtrack, what were some of the challenges that you had with trying to come out with this to your Bandcamp?
Oh, without question. I think the biggest problem was that it was just too many tracks to try and master all at once. So, you know, like I said, I've been trying to become a bit more of a producer, finding out how I can produce my tracks better. Mastering is like kind of another layer on top of producing. Like you can produce a track to sound good on its own, but then how do you make a big collection of tracks sound good all together? Yeah. And that was one thing I had to learn the hard way with this soundtrack was I think at one point there was 80 tracks on the soundtrack, and I was planning to put them all on the Bandcamp, but so I created all these master files for it. I didn't do it in a good way. Like mastering is definitely an art form that takes a long time, but you can sort of fudge it a bit. And I tried to fudge it without even knowing how to fudge it. And Brian, you know, thankfully he said he didn't like the way a lot of the master tracks sound, because like I said, this project started in 2015. So some of the old tracks are still on this soundtrack. And they're mixed with the new tracks, and the mix of quality in terms of the first sort of year of this project, I didn't know how to produce tracks, and then everything after that I knew how to produce, but they're all together on the soundtrack. So if I'm trying to make these old tracks fit with the new tracks now, in terms of mastering the whole 80 of the tracks, it just became just a nightmare of figuring out. So shortly after the soundtrack got completed and the game was released, I wanted to release the soundtrack with the game at the same time, but the files, the songs just didn't sound right. And I got busy with like multiple other projects immediately after that, so I just didn't have time to go back and correctly master them and learn how to master them. So it took like 6 months after the release for me to actually get all that done, but I finally did, so I'm just happy it's out in any form.
It came out a couple weeks ago actually, so
oh wow.
I
didn't realize it was that recent. Like,
So
it was a pretty quiet release.
So we're hoping to shed some light on it to get some ears
I appreciate that
to your Bandcamp, so that way people could check it out, because it really is a stellar soundtrack. It's such a shame that there's so many tracks too, because I mean obviously that kind of time that it took to put together those tracks, you know, I feel almost like this would be a perfect album to listen to on vinyl just to chill out. And
I would agree.
We're thinking of that.
yeah,
This is another one of those albums that I would love to do for an XVGM After Dark.
Yeah. We've been talking about that. We've been talking about doing like an XVGM After Dark, where like we play records and we record them through our mixer, and we just
stream it on Twitch.
Yeah.
We'll be in like a bathrobe or something.
yeah, pipe and fake cigar and
glass of whiskey.
Yeah, there you go.
It's classy. Keep it classy.
Yeah, you gotta. Cool. So let's move on to our next track on this. What do you got?
So we are going to listen to this. This is a really neat one. I like this one. This is called Flashbacks. You're listening to XVGM Radio. All right, come on back. That was just a flashback. We're back in the here and the now. Yeah, the name of that track was Flashbacks, and that track gives me flashbacks.
It does.
I mean, we've been talking a lot about the 80s, but as we were sort of saying during the break, it to me has somewhat of a Joy Division feel. Like I'm feeling like dark wave goth rock from the 80s, and man, I mean, it's right in my aesthetic, so
yeah.
Of course I like it.
This is your jam, right? Yeah, this reminded me of a game called Crossing Souls, which had a release maybe like 2 years ago or a year ago. And it's also like a very 80s type game, and so they also used a very similar kind of sound. Specifically, if you go and watch the trailer and listen to it, you'll be like, wow, that sounds like very similar.
Yeah.
It's not the same song, obviously, but it's got those like very similar 80s undertones.
Yep.
The very kind of like I wouldn't even say it's minor tone for this one.
No,
I would say they're more like major tone. Very bubbly almost, but like a subdued feel to it. It's not quite super happy-go-lucky, but at the same time, it's got this heavy weight to it that has that 80s kind of vibe that makes it sound cold, like what Matt was saying. So, what was your inspiration on this one?
Yeah, that was it. Like I was trying to make something cold, and to do that, like a lot of the tracks on this soundtrack sort of start with a pulsing bass.
Yeah.
And then it sort of builds from there. But then the next thing I added was that long sustained synth thing that sort of has the hiccup in it, like weir.
Yeah.
And that was actually done on the mod wheel, so it's like a pitch bend. So I'm sustaining the note, and then I'm just sort of like pitching it down and letting it rise back up really quickly. So I don't know how to play keyboard that well. So the funny thing is, like, if you just envision yourself like you think you look playing keyboard, you can play better. Like, if you picture yourself doing like Stevie Wonder moves and stuff, like, really getting into you end up playing better as a result. And that's kind of what I was doing. Like, I was kind of Stevie Wondering this one. So I'm the new wave sort of 80s synth guy, like just looking ridiculous playing in my goth outfit and all that. That was kind of what I was doing on this one.
Nice.
Channeling my inner goth, I guess.
I was gonna say, I feel like if if we get Morrissey to sing over this, it would sound very in line with a lot of that stuff and the Smiths and whatnot.
I think by accident, I actually I end up doing the same bass line as Blue Monday at one point in this track.
Oh, nice.
And I didn't realize it until after I wrote it. I'm like, well, whatever. That's that just came to my head. Blue Monday can't have that forever, can they? Like,
you just should have put like a whisper
there.
You should have put like a whisper vocal in the back, like at the very end, to be like, how does it feel?
Jeez.
Speaking of programs, because you talk a little bit about using the keyboard, what were some of the programs that you used to compose this soundtrack?
Well, the program that I wrote it all in is Cubase, and that's actually one of the other things. I mentioned there was a couple of coming of age points in this soundtrack. The other one was when I started making the soundtrack, it was on Cubase version 6, which I purchased in 2012, and I've been using it all the way until like 2017-ish, and it was old by that point, and I actually had to not only buy a new version of Cubase, but I got a new version of Windows. Like everything was Windows 7 until I had to upgrade everything basically because I was bumping up to a limitation on how big I could make my project files for Slayin' 2, which is a game that is about to come out later this year. I needed more RAM. I couldn't run my my project files in Cubase because you can't update the RAM for the home edition of Windows 7. Like I needed a lot more RAM, so I had to actually bite the bullet and be like, all right, Windows 10, more RAM. I'll get a new version of Cubase. I'll upgrade everything, and so I had to transition from Cubase 6 to Cubase 9 in this project, and you'd think it wouldn't be as hard as it was, but it was like pulling teeth again, like just dragging me kicking and screaming like for the second time in the process of one soundtrack. But yeah, everything was done with Cubase 9.
Would you say that this is your hardest soundtrack that you've ever had to work on based on all the stuff that you had to go through?
Yes, and like writing it necessarily isn't the hard part, but I realized like, on the topic of becoming a producer, there's sort of back end things that you have to do with your own music to make it sound better. And so the mixing and making everything sound better was like an iceberg. Like writing the music was the tip of the iceberg, and everything else was like the part under the water that you don't see. It's humongous, and it was just like a never-ending task of troubleshooting. And like if I wanted to open up my old project files to mix them, a lot of times since they were written in Cubase 6 on an older version of Windows, they didn't open on my new version of Windows, so I had to actually leave my old version plugged in still, and I have all these cables that I could switch. Like I had to crawl under my desk like 50 times just to produce the back end of this soundtrack. And when I would open up the old projects too, like there's the 64-bit, 32-bit thing.
Oh yeah.
A lot of these tracks are so old that they were still dealing with that. So when I updated some of my synths or whatever, because you're like, oh wow, an updated synth with new features, great. But then when you load up your project that has the old synth on it, it just won't open it anymore. Or sometimes it'll open it without the presets, like the settings. So at least a couple times I had to create the sounds from scratch a second time, years after I wrote the track. It's just like, it's mind-boggling how like it's a testament of the human spirit to actually get all this stuff done. So when the soundtrack doesn't get released, like there's a reason for it. Like there was so much that it was like going to war every time I got on my computer for like a good year.
And that's tough too. I mean, to get that inspiration to release it, you've got to jump through all these flaming hoops and everything just to get the soundtrack out based on the quality that you wanted it to release to.
So like you went from 6 to 9, so you skipped versions 7 and 8. I wonder if there was any kind of like conversion path that could have been done to like convert your stuff from 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 that would have like saved the data integrity, but that would most likely also require you to buy 7 and 8, and there's no reason to pay for every version in between. But like that's insane to
I feel like they should give you that.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Like I feel like Cubase should have some kind of a way to help you take something from an older version and bring it up to the newer versions without losing any of the sounds or any of the stuff that you put into it. Like I realize you're skipping 2 whole like major releases, but that's still like there's got to be some way. Obviously it's too late now. What's done, like you clearly have got it. Did what you needed to do, but like oh man, but from like a tech perspective, that's just like
frustrating.
Painful.
At the end of the day, I think Cubase necessarily wasn't the ultimate culprit. I think it was just updating synths. If you update anything and then I think it's a problem that like how like a console will come out and they'll have third-party games, but then there'll be first-party games, and the third-party games don't necessarily know what the first-party company is designing and how they designed all their architecture. So all those first-party games kind of get a nice little benefit of knowing exactly how the architecture goes, but third-party, like it could kind of get a little shifty and weird. I think that's just what happens. Like some of this software, you update it, you think you're great, but then like just wherever it's stored, and it's funny, like in Windows 7, some of the stuff is just put in the most hilarious places that you can't find when you're actually looking for it. But yeah. It was, every problem that could have came up for sure. But at a certain point, some of the projects just wouldn't open because like they try and load something that couldn't be loaded, and then it would crash. So I had to actually go through my synth folder, like the VSTs, that's what you call it, synths, and I had to X out certain folders just to see which one was causing the problem. And there's like hundreds of folders, so I had to do that for every opening. Like I'd have to X out a bunch of folders, then try and open it again, be like, does it work? No. Does it work? Yes. Okay. So then I'd find out, okay, that was the problem.
Right.
And so I had to do a lot of stuff sort of like that, like weird troubleshooting stuff like that.
You think about it and you're like, what would have been harder, doing this or doing like assembly based on like the old NES actual soundtracks?
Yeah.
And what do you use for NES? Because I know you had the song Jungle Mercenary that had the NES kind of sound still kind of buried in there. Did you use Famitracker for a song like that just for the NES portion and then like bring it into Cubase, or?
No, you know what's weird is that the guys who make Famitracker and Cubase or some other third party, they don't work together. Like there should be a Famitracker VST that loads up in Cubase.
Yeah.
Because that would be ideal, because Famitracker is a really great resource for creating Nintendo sounds. But the secret is that like it's not hard to create Nintendo sounds that are raw. So all the fun of Nintendo was where you would start carving away at the sound to make sort of pockets of volume that sort of create the sounds that we remember. But a game like Zelda, for example, Zelda 1, it just had a raw square wave, and you can make a square wave in literally any synth that sounds vaguely passable as Nintendo sounding. Right. So I can't remember exactly what I used on that track, but I just used a 25% duty cycle square wave, which is basically, think Mega Man. Like Mega Man soundtracks use the 25% duty cycle a lot, and so you just set a 25 duty cycle in any synth, and it kind of works just well enough.
Cool.
Fair. Nice.
What do you say we get Obliterated?
Oh, jeez.
Let's do it.
Is that PC? Is that family friendly?
Yeah, let's do it.
Especially when it's the name of a track.
Yeah, which is coming up right now. Hey, you are back to XVGM Radio. That was Obliterator. And
Man.
That was obliterating. That was awesome.
I'm obliterated.
My face is melted. There's nothing left. I'm just an
I'm sorry, guys.
But by no means is that a bad thing.
Yeah, no, not at all.
This is actually currently my pick for favorite track of the night so far.
Snap.
We'll see what the next 4 tracks have to bring. But
snap.
This one, we're currently, as we're recording this, in the month of October, which is when I think I talked about this during our live show recently. I turn on my Halloween playlist, which is technically just my goth playlist with like some Michael Jackson, some silly songs from Halloween thrown in.
Rockwell.
Yep.
Did you throw Rockwell in?
I did throw Rockwell in after our conversation.
Yes.
As well as Monster Mash. But either way,
yes.
It primarily is a lot of like gothic, dark wave, stuff like that. And this, I wouldn't say that it sounds like something that I was listening to, but it sounds like something that I wish was in my playlist. So I may just add this track to that playlist. it sounds a lot like, I mean, these two bands aren't really that close to each other, but Covenant and Leather Strip are two different bands that have a really kind of grungy dark wave sound, and like a lot of the deep synthy stuff that you have going on here reminds me a lot of what I like out of Covenant, and a lot of the, like, some of the more melodic stuff that you have in here reminds me a lot of what I like out of Leather Strip.
This is what those kids in South Park, the goth kids, dance to.
Yeah.
For sure.
I know it's good for them.
I'm going to look them both up for sure.
Yeah. So I don't have as much experience with goth, but I do really like this.
Yeah.
I got a very, I don't want to say industrial, but it does kind of have that like goth industrial kind of vibe to it.
That whole genre, like, I mean, goth encompasses a lot of things, but like industrial and dark wave, there's a lot of bleed. Like you can find your purely industrial bands like your Typo Negative and stuff. You can find your purely dark wave bands. In my opinion, the ones that are really good and the ones that I really like, there tends to be a lot of bleed from all that stuff. And then maybe just because I like both of those things, so it's like you put them together in one song, and I'm just infinitely more happy.
I just, that bass is all I can remember from this track, because it's really cool how it like bleeds through the main melody, and then it kind of fades into the background to let the melody kind of breathe a little bit, and then it kind of comes back. It sounds really dangerous, almost as if you're being chased, you know, by something, and it's like gaining on you, and then like it falls back, and then it's gaining on you.
Like it's chasing you, and maybe it wants to obliterate you.
Yes, exactly. So you got to tell us what was the inspiration on this one, on Obliterator?
That's quite an astute observation. I think you nailed it, actually. I think that was, I mentioned earlier, kind of broke the game down into a couple different flavors, and one of them was driving flavor, and the other one was just action flavor, like encounters, because a lot of times in this game, you just get jumped by a bunch of enemies really quickly, and it's kind of like, oh, now action is happening right at this moment.
Yeah.
And so we needed more tracks to just kind of get into it quickly. And so, you know, that was what I wanted from this one. Like, right from the get-go, let's get one that's sort of hitting you hard right from the start. The only thing that I kind of wanted to attempt with this track was there's a technique that, you know, I learned from Synthwave a lot, where if you have just like a steady 4-on-the-floor drum beat, you can kind of have your bass line ducking whenever the kick drum hits. That's how you sort of carve out this almost rolling quality to it.
Yeah.
Other than that, that was basically it. Just a slammer from the get-go, and the name was pretty easy for that one. I wanted something that's like Obliterator right now. Let's go.
Well, great success, I must say.
Yeah, good stuff. When it comes to the soundtrack, like, how long did it take for you to write the entire soundtrack, and what was the process like when sending the tracks back to Brian, the developer?
We had an interesting relationship with this. Like, it was a 3-year-long game, basically. Like, I worked on it from 2015 to 2018. But we never really had, like, a hard deadline. So usually Brian would just tell me, like, oh, can you get a bunch of tracks ready for the next time I'm showing the game at a convention or showing it here? So then it would be, like, really quickly just slam a bunch of tracks out and then do some other games in the meantime, and then slam a bunch of tracks out for this game again after. So it was like start and stop. So every time I came back to the project, I kind of learned a lot more things, and I was wanting to try different things. But yeah, Brian, the other thing, like, a lot of the music in this game isn't really necessarily inspired by the visuals in the game. It was mostly just inspired by the idea of the game, I guess. So we never really had a standing order to, like, can you score this scene or can you score that? So that's where the flavor is basically all I was scoring. Like, let's just write something that sort of slams right from the get-go. And I guess early on, it just found out that Brian kind of liked the synthy stuff I was writing, so he didn't really give me a lot of direction. He just said basically, like, write me stuff. So I was kind of in the dark, and that was kind of why a lot of even this track, for example, is this sounds like my default mode, you know, like, and it almost kind of has that, you mentioned Halloweenish feel, like or kind of a good Halloween track, or to be on a Halloween playlist. Like, I kind of by default am always referencing the Unsolved Mysteries theme song. So it's just kind of floating around in this track.
Right. I totally hear it too.
Just a standing order to always just go as hard Robert Stack as I possibly can.
That is a remix that somebody, if not you, but somebody needs to make. All right, let's get into our next track.
So we are going to hear Riding Bazooka just for those of you just tuning in, this is all about Shakedown Hawaii, which was a game with a soundtrack composed by Matt Creamer, which came out this year, 2019. Welcome back. Get down from there. That was dangerous. That is Riding Bazooka off of Shakedown Hawaii. And what did you think, Mike?
I thought it felt like riding a bazooka. I mean, come on now.
I need you to explain that sentence.
There's so much going on in this track. It's crazy. Matt has been known to write tracks that I dive deep into. There's a few that come to mind. And the one that always floats to the top of my head is on Venture Kid, on the Venture Kid soundtrack. I think it's like level 4. It's a phenomenal song because it's one of those songs that it has all these like layers buried deep into the song, like kind of baked in like a super lasagna. And then as you're kind of like, I don't know, ingesting it, you're kind of like, oh man, like I could taste this, I could taste that, I could hear this, I could hear that. Yeah. Like you're hearing all these different things, and then in your own mind, you're creating like your own melodies to it. You know, kind of like you sing a song and like Creed's Take Me Higher, you know? So somebody will be like, can you take me high? And then like somebody else will come in and be like, can you take me? Like they'll go higher. Like they'll create octaves that aren't there. You know what I mean? That track in particular on Venture Kid, it's like all this stuff is kind of baked into it, and then you start creating your own melodies in your head and then singing those along out loud or even in your head while the track is playing, and it just adds such a new level to video game music. So with this song, this was one of those types of songs too, because there was like a little bit of call and answer going on. You had like, like you know, like you would have one synth kind of doing something, and then the other synth would kind of like chime in and be like, yeah, me too, dude. So that's exactly what went on in my head. So while I was listening to the song, I was trying to dissect it all, and I'm sorry, but like 2 listens like that, like a loop, just wasn't enough. So this is definitely one of those songs I'm going to go back and listen over and over and over and kind of pick it apart.
Get little new things each time.
Yeah. And like that's some of my favorite music. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is it's a good song. Yeah.
That's super interesting to hear, because when you said that about the Venture Kid track last time we did a chat together, that was the one track on the album that I was like, that just you know, it's weird when you write music and it's your favorite track at the time that you're writing it, and then after, when you look back at it, that you just have weird feelings about some of the tracks you wrote, and that was one that I had a weird feeling about. But this one I do still like it hasn't reached that point where I'm like, I feel weird about this track. So it's interesting to hear you say that, because like when I listen to this track, I only listen to it in terms of, there was basically like 3 stages to this soundtrack. There was the early songs I wrote before we knew it was going to sound like synth stuff, and that was like the more Amiga sounding stuff. And actually Flashbacks is one of the original like 2015 tracks from this game.
Oh, okay.
So like that one kind of bled over, and I did have to actually go back and remix it to make it sound like the other tracks. But then the middle track the middle phase was where I kind of just wrote, you know, the CEO's return and a lot of more of the cinematics sort of synthy stuff, and And the final stage, it was something that we've been meaning to do for a long time with this game, was like, it's got to sound a little more Hawaii sounding. I figured out I could add Balinese gamelan, which is, it's kind of like a xylophone, but it's like this weird like South Asian xylophone that has this really sort of tropical sound to it.
Oh, is that what that is? That
yeah.
Like, it almost sounded like a xylophone, like dun 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 dun. Like,
yeah, it's a mallet instrument, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like a mallet instrument that it's a great instrument. And like Chrono Trigger used it a lot in like the Zeal location.
Oh,
they had
yep.
like a
Yes.
gamelan was all over that. And I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it, but that's how it's spelled, so that's how I pronounce it. But
Okay.
I love that instrument, and I bought this like super fancy sample library for it, and I just been dying for a reason to use it. And I was like, okay, this will be what I do. I'm gonna add the gamelan, and I'm going to add the Linn drum sound sample. So Linn drum is like, we were talking about Madonna earlier. Madonna and other artists from the 80s, they all used this early drum machine called the Linn drum. And it just was used on a ton of albums. And so if you use Linn drum samples on your tracks, you kind of just by default sound like 80s pop music.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, I'll add that in and I'll try and produce it so it sounds really thumping and really good. And then add synth. So it's like gamelan, synth, and those drums. And that was what I did for like 10 tracks. I just belted out a bunch of tracks that all kind of had that vibe to it. And Night Ride was also in that era of the tracks for this game. And so, yeah, that was what I think of when I think of this track, was like just the instruments I was using. But now that you've mentioned like the layers and stuff, I'm trying to like picture like there's like another thing that I have to be thinking about with this track now. And I'm going to have to go back and listen to it over and over again just to sort of hear it from other perspectives.
Yeah. So let's move on to our next track. So this song is Clothes Make the Man. Speaking of 80s, that's a very 80s sounding name.
Yeah.
Hey, you are back, and that was Clothes Make the Man, and these clothes make this man awesome. Because that song was awesome. That was
really cool.
Yeah, I like dance music. So we were talking about it a little bit during the break, but Matt, kind of fill in the public for what inspired Clothes Make the Man.
Okay, you imagine just walking into, like, you walk into the Gap and you're going to try on some
80s
trendy
Gap.
clothes. I just pictured, like, this is what I picture when you're standing in the dressing room and you're just hearing this in the background. Like, it's funny, if someone were to ask you right now, a movie that you know really well, like say Back to the Future, say, hey, could you recreate Back to the Future right now without referencing it? You'd be like, all right, I could make you a version of it. It probably will be weird because there'll be weird gaps and things that don't exactly line up. So I like making music that way, where I don't want to directly reference anything. I just want to try and create it how I think it sounds right now.
Yeah.
So this was me trying to make like a dance track right now that kind of, I guess I was trying to be modern with it, but I also just lace it with synth that were like, they sort of fit with the soundtrack. But it's never been a better time to make music than there is right now, because it's so easy to make music right now. Like there's a lot of tools that make making music easier than it's ever been. Like before, they used to have to plug things together. It was a hellish nightmare to do stuff like that. But now it's like you can create a song like this really quickly. And I've kind of never wanted to sort of do that, because I feel like I'm cheating if I do that. Like you can hit down a button and you'll get these, or here's another example. There'll be like loops, or pre-made drum loops that exist, and you can buy them and put them in your own track and then write your song to this pre-made drum loop. And I don't like using loops, but for the same logic, I don't like using when a synth comes out. So for example, the synth I used for this was called Vengeance Avenger. And so Vengeance is the company name, and then the Avenger is called the synth. And they have drum beats that are sort of built into it that you can just hit one button and it'll play the drum beat.
Right.
And so this drum beat came right off of Avenger. And it's like, I don't know anything about dance music, but once I heard that drum beat, it's like, oh, okay, well, I kind of get what dance music, like, all right, it naturally made me start writing music like that, but I always avoid using the pre-made stuff for some reason, even though the best kept secret in the whole like audio world is that everyone's using loops and everyone's using all this stuff, and very few people, you know, especially in the pop sort of realm, very few of them are ever writing their own stuff from scratch. But this was me allowing myself to sort of cheat in my own eyes and like use some of these sort of built-in presets because I needed help. I couldn't just write a dance track from scratch because it's like trying to recreate a movie you've never seen before. So that was everything. This is a weird track, but you know, the track in the game too is only like 30 seconds long.
Right.
And
it's short.
Brian was like, he liked this track a lot too. He's like, could you just like extend this track? Like, hey, and he kept kind of subtly asking me like, hey, if you want to extend it, that'd be fine. I was like, no, I don't want to extend it. Like, it's just a 30-second track. Let's go. For the soundtrack, I was like, man, I should probably just extend it and give it like a little bit extra life. And it's weird how easy it is to write dance music. Like, not easy as in cheap. It's just like it's natural. Like once you get that drum beat, it's like everything sounds good.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Maybe there's a future for me in writing more dance music. I don't know.
I would agree with a lot of what you said there. I think especially for a lot of the really good dance music that you'll see, like loops are sort of a thing.
Yeah.
I haven't composed in years. The last time I actually composed something from scratch was back in college, and everything that I was doing at that point, like nothing really ever got out, but everything that I was doing was pretty much loops. There was a little bit here and there that I'd build my own stuff, but anytime I put loops together, it sounded good. I'm like, why am I killing myself to like come up with something from nothing when these loops are just like, it's what I want to dance to. And one of the other things you said was you were trying to get more of a modern feel out of this track, and I have to say, I think that you hit that because as I'm listening to this when it started, one of the first things that I was thinking of is this feels more modern than a lot of the other stuff that we're listening to, which felt very much like it came out of the 80s. And as you get deeper into the song, like it feels like a combination of some of the modern and some of the throwback. But again, I'm gonna reference another like goth band, but
nice.
Black Audio, BLAQK.
Okay.
Audio. Specifically, I don't think that this song sounds like their track Stiff Kittens, but a lot of the tracks on their debut album have sort of that weird like modern but very like feels like it came out of the 80s, but it has too much modern sound and feel to it to really be in the 80s, and that's just the feel that I got out of it.
All right, so moving on from the shopping mall store, the clothing store, to...
Well, maybe not.
No?
No, because this next one is called Lobby Line, so...
So it's like the mall, like the lobby of the mall.
Yeah, and you're just hanging out, you're in line.
Yeah.
Maybe waiting to pay for something.
Well, that's what I mean. We're transitioning from the store to the lobby.
Oh, I see.
Listen, there's a process. Yeah, there's a process. All right, this is Lobby Line.
All right, hopefully you paid for all of your goods, because that was Lobby Line, and we are now out of there. We got one more to go before we're done, but my last pick there was, I wouldn't call it a downer, but kind of a come downer.
Yeah, I could see that. Like a chill, relaxing, kind of beachy vibe to it. This would be a good summer tracks track.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think this is actually probably the most chill track on the entire soundtrack. I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I heard that was more just sort of like
laid back,
and I don't think there was, but
this is probably the closest.
Yeah, if there was anything else, this was definitely the one that grabbed my attention, because for as chill as it was, and I mean, our Summer Tracks episode, I think, showcased a lot of that stuff.
Sure.
But just because it's chill doesn't mean that it's not fun. Like, this one made me happy. It was just... It's called Lobby Line. This isn't the way that I feel when I'm in a line in a lobby. I'm usually more frustrated or aggravated. But I dug this. Like, this is something that I would listen to just laying either on the beach or just like hanging out, sitting in a chair in my yard.
Drinking a daiquiri. So this one was definitely a come downer as far as the tracks go. Because all throughout the entire episode, we had songs that were just like super energetic or super like menacing. That's the best word for it. It's like, this is a very like dark, haunting kind of soundtrack. It just gets under your skin, and it totally fits with the vibe that the game is putting out. Even like the characters, like watching the characters in this game when you're playing it, it's weird. Like you touched on earlier that it's Amiga based as far as the original idea for the soundtrack. But visually, the aesthetics are very Amiga-esque. Gone are the kind of sprite-based stuff on the NES, which was very kind of rudimentary, but it also, there was a lot of detail to it, but at the same time, it was very simplistic looking. Here you have, it's definitely like a bump up in graphics. Like it's, you know, a 16-bit style as far as the visuals go, but it's not 16-bit like Super NES or Genesis even. It's 16-bit like Amiga. Which is just, it feels different. You know, the characters...
It's gritty. Gritty.
It's very gritty. The characters move grittier. When you're in a cutscene with some of the characters and you're talking to like the CEOs, or you're talking to like some of the other people that you're working with, some of the like building investors and people that are telling you to knock down buildings, you run around with like a flamethrower and you're like burning all the trees to like destroy the property so that way they could build on that land. The people that you talk to in this game just feel gross and they look gross, and I feel like, and this isn't to say that the music is gross, it's more to say that the music matches the aesthetic of the visuals of the game that it's trying to go for. It sounds like Amiga in a way, but it also looks like Amiga. It has that weird look to it where all the characters look like their mouths are constantly moving, but they're not always talking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a really unique vibe to go for in this day and age. Everyone's so busy trying to recapture like the NES era. The 16-bit era is not forgotten, but I would say most of the people that are kind of recapturing that era, it's like all the action games, like the Striders, you know, Ninja Warriors, like that type of aesthetic that most people are going for. The Streets of Rage, that type of stuff.
Yeah, or the RPGs.
Yeah, or the RPGs, like Chrono Trigger type stuff. But nobody goes after like that weird 16-bit era of Amiga gaming where Jim Power in the Lost Dimension, like that visual style, Jim Power in Mutant Planet, Turrican, like that type of stuff. Or even like Leisure Suit Larry. That type of aesthetic is what they're going for with this game, with the characters and the way that they look.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's really unique for this day and age as far as like a retro throwback title. It's really cool. So musically anyways, I'm assuming that shopping was pretty much like your main, like what you would hear if you were in a lobby, like waiting to
like
hang
music.
out. Yeah, is that pretty appropriate?
Yep, that was exactly it. It's like I said, when I was working with Brian for Retro City Rampage, I figured he might need a track for a scene that might be like this or a scene that might be like that. And so when I was looking at this game, there was one mission in particular. It's like a Black Friday mission where you're just in this big shopping, like one room, but it's a huge room and it's filled with like 50 people. It's a ton of sprites, and it's just like, I think it's one of the missions is just you have to knock everyone out to like get your, I don't even know why you have to do this, but I thought, man, would that be funny if it was playing like a samba song, you know, like a something you might hear in a lobby line during that scene of all scenes. And so in the game also, with a lot of the shopping or the grocery stores or the shopping stores, I sent Brian like alternate mixes so they sound like they're coming out of like gritty speakers, like a Kmart speaker.
Right.
And so that was, I was just picturing in my head like that would make it really funny if it was just this broken speaker playing this really silly samba song, you know, but like honest to goodness, this is I tried my best to write a samba track. And I even I loaded up a bunch of, I tried to learn how to do samba, just like I tried to learn how to do production. And I tried to I had to actually break down what is samba actually, because I don't know what it is actually. So I had to break down some of the chord changes and how the bass line is supposed to be made if you want to create that samba feel. Like, how funny would it be if this just the honest to goodness samba track is playing over broken speakers while you're just maiming a bunch of people on Black Friday?
Yeah,
it's definitely that consumerism parody, those dark vibes that stuff like Dawn of the Dead went for. Judge Dredd, the newest Dredd movie.
Really good.
It was really good. Like, it was one of those like dark comedy kind of aesthetics. It is so violent and so gritty and so tough, but at the same time it's just buried on top of like silly happy-go-lucky samba music, you know, like that's so funny. Like, you really have to see the irony of that type of music playing there. So it's cool to see it in a video game for once instead of a movie. All right, so let's move on to our final track of the evening. This is Island Heist from Shakedown Hawaii, the soundtrack released in 2019 by Matt Creamer, aka Norrin Radd. Welcome back to the Shakedown Hawaii soundtrack. That song was Island Heist to close out the episode, and that was by Matt Creamer, aka Norrin Radd, off the 2019 soundtrack.
Good closing track.
Very good closing track.
It has some of the closing energy of Lobby Line, but it goes right back to the feeling and the grunginess of the rest of what we've been listening to on the soundtrack.
For sure.
So it very neatly sort of, I feel like, wraps up what we've been listening to with a nice little bow. Yeah.
No, I agree with that. And the intro that we played, the CEO's Return, that was a great intro, and there's a reason for that. It's because that's the first song that you hear in the main menu. And so Island Heist, I feel like, is the perfect way to close out the episode. It has almost like an opposite energy or an opposite vibe to the CEO's Return. So I thought it was a good way to send off the show.
I agree.
Yeah. So recently, I know that, because I'm friends with you on Facebook, and also I think we're mutual friends with who we were talking about a little earlier, Danimal Cannon. He posted that he was hanging out with you at some sort of show that I guess you also played at. And I remember seeing like a video that I think he posted or you posted where you were playing some Shakedown Hawaii stuff like up on stage. Is that right?
Yeah, he filmed it and then he posted it on Twitter. So I had to like go through some weird back end like plugins to download it off Twitter so that I could post it on my Facebook, because I didn't want to bother him asking for it. But,
right.
Yeah, that was me posting that on Facebook. And that show was amazing. That was actually a really fun show.
Have you played other shows before, or was that your first one?
That's the second one I've ever done. So it was for Vancouver Chip Music Society. They do a Overflow. It's the name of the series they're doing. So it was created by Brian Chan and Andrew Ferguson, and they wanted to create sort of a chip scene in Vancouver. And so I was one of the oldest. I'm like the father figure in the chip scene in Vancouver, 'cause it's just based on me being the oldest one.
Right.
But I'm not really in the chip scene. Like I'm not passionate about like performing live chip tunes, but there's a lot of younger guys and girls, like just a huge slew of like really young people that are super into it.
Yeah.
And so I was at the first Overflow show that they ever put on. So that was Overflow show 0. And there was maybe like 20 people in the crowd is what it looked like to me. It was a very small show, but this one was, I mean, we had some big names on it. Like they had Danny B and Animal Cannon, who are like artists that I'm really into.
Yeah.
And the show had 270 people, they said. So that was like a monster show.
That's awesome.
Same venue though. So
yeah, must have been packed. That's cool. Yeah, and that Danny B, that's Danny Baranowski, right?
Yeah.
Very cool. So how does that work as far as when you play your music live? Because I know that you have a ton of stuff that you have to do to actually make the music, as far as utilizing Cubase. And are you instead like, I don't want to put it as simply just hitting play and then walking away and dancing around, but like, how does that aesthetic come about when you're doing a live show?
That's kind of the reason I didn't connect with chiptunes for a long time. I always wondered, why would people do a chiptune show? Like what are you doing? Because I know as a chiptune creator, I would just have to go in and press play. And that wasn't necessarily the show I want to go see. But the thing I realized is a chiptune show is like, it's not a normal concert. It's not a concert like you go to see a band play a show, your favorite songs. It's more like you're a DJ, and the thing you're DJing is this aesthetic that people really like, and it's like this aesthetic that is so wide and far-reaching that I don't even know how to define it. Like, are people there for nostalgia, or are the younger kids there because of something I can't understand? I don't quite get it. But the thing I did notice at this show in particular was people just were really having a good time. So I wonder if it's just like it's a thing to do it's a new thing that people do. I don't know. I really don't know. My only secret weapon I had was, if I dance around like a goofball, then maybe I can kind of make people appreciate that they came to see me live. So if you ever watch the live stream for that show, it is a spectacle, an absolute spectacle.
I will have to check that out. Yeah. Well, we definitely highly appreciate you coming on the show and chatting to us about this fantastic soundtrack, Shakedown Hawaii. And we know you put a lot of time and effort and hard work into it, and also compiling the actual soundtrack. So we want to thank you for coming on the show. Where can we find you on the web?
First of all, thank you guys for having me on the show. I always like talking with you, and Justin, meeting you as well. It's been great. It's easy to talk with guys that know this much about like the most niche subject ever.
For sure.
Video game music.
Yes.
But yeah, if you guys are looking for me online, like I am on Twitter under Norrin_Radd22. But usually if you type in mattcreameraudio.com or Matt Creamer Audio into Facebook or anything like that, it'll usually come up, as long as you get the Matt Creamer Audio portion in there.
Sweet.
Nice.
Awesome. So, favorite tracks of the episode, Justin?
So I have not moved from our sixth track, Obliterator. Is still right up the top there, and I think in second place I might have to go with Clothes Make the Man, but I also really like Beach Cruise, so maybe those are a little bit tied for second, but still Obliterator's up top. Beach
Cruise for me is probably going to take it, followed by Night Ride, as well as Riding Bazooka. Yeah, I think Riding Bazooka was the one that I was going kind of crazy for. So.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
I guess I gotta go Beach Cruise. That was the funnest one to write. I think it's the one I think I'll be listening to the longest after the soundtrack is all said and done. Something about Beach Cruise is funny. It's very corporate, like training video vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thanks so much to Matt for being on the show. But what we wanted to do is Matt was super gracious and was able to give us some giveaway stuff, both from Matt as well as Brian Provinciano over at V-Blank Games. So if you've listened to this episode and you're thinking to yourself, man, I'd love to play this game, it sounds really cool, and I'd love to get the soundtrack, well, now you can. So what we have is a giveaway for our Patreon donators. You have to be a Patreon donator of $1 or more. We're going to be doing a raffle giveaway, and we've got several codes to give away. I believe it's 2 for the PlayStation 4 and 2 for the Nintendo Switch. These are digital codes only, one-time use obviously, So if you don't have the game already, we would love to give you an opportunity to win the game. And on top of that, also, we're going to be giving away copies of the soundtrack digitally as well, courtesy of Matt. And for that, I think we've got about 3, but it's going to be 1 per person. And we're going to be doing a raffle giveaway. A $1 entry gets you in. If you are already a Patreon person, don't have to do anything. Just keep up your subscription. Yep. Otherwise, if you are new and you are thinking, hey, I've never donated to a Patreon before, take a look at it. It's on our Patreon, which we'll be mentioning in just a few minutes.
Yeah, we have a link in our show notes for our Patreon in every episode, so you can click on that to go to the Patreon, check it out, see what it's about.
For sure.
But we'll be doing the draw at the end of November, so if you are a donating Patreon of $1 or more, by the time that we do the drawing, which will be end of the month,
of November.
We haven't chosen a date, but it'll be before December.
Yes, and we will give away the copies live on our live show in December.
In December.
Yeah,
okay.
because that'll give enough time for everyone to sign up in November and then, attend the live show in December, our closeout episode for the year of live shows. And we'll announce the date of that on, on the Patreon whenever, and of course on our social media, Facebook, Twitter, etc., etc. So we wanted to do something special for the patrons as like an end thing, and we felt this was like the perfect opportunity. So we want to thank V Blank Games, Brian Provinciano, and of course Matt Creamer for donating those codes to us. So thanks, guys.
Our pleasure.
So we'd like to take a moment to thank our Patreon patrons, without whom this show's continued improvement would be impossible. They are Alex Messenger, Scott McElhone, Cam Worma, Chris Murray, Kung Fu Carlito of the Heroes 3 podcast, Jordan and Anson Davis, Chris Myers, Llama Adam, Jeremy Rutz, Peter Panda, Bedroth, Nick Davis, Brad Austin, Mixmaster, and the Autistic Gamer 89. If you would like to become a patron, you can sign up at patreon.com/xvgmradio. There you can see the different tiers as well. Just $1 gets you a thank you and access to our monthly live shows.
You can visit our website, xvgmradio.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and learn more about your hosts, as well as any of our guests or composers that we've had on the show.
If you'd like to reach out to us, you can always email us at xvgmradio@gmail.com.
And if you'd like what you've heard, please consider giving us a rating on iTunes and a review.
You can also join our Facebook group and chat with other VGM lovers at www.facebook.com/groups/xvgmradio, where we talk about everything from current game news to sharing awesome VGM tracks, or just talking about the podcast itself.
And you can find us on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle for both of those sites is @XVGMRadio.
If you don't have any other social media or just want to try something unique, check us out on our Discord group chat. Links will be in the show notes.
So, Justin, what do we have coming up for episode 39?
I don't think we have anything. I don't think we thought we were gonna make it this far.
That's true. No. No.
So episode 39 is an episode that I have been hankering to get to.
You
and
have.
we are finally getting there.
We've pushed this one back for like almost a year.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
And for various reasons, but it is going to be all about remixes and covers. I think it's going to be very remix heavy.
Remix.
But we do have a couple of covers in here.
Yeah, some covers, some remixes. It's going to be like some OCR stuff.
Yep.
Then some other really super obscure stuff. So
yeah, it's things from like Overclocked Remix, Game Chops. So stick around. In 2 weeks, we will be listening to all sorts of like club jams and fun remixes of some of our favorite tracks.
Cool. Well, this is Mike
and Justin
signing off for XVGM Radio. So, I don't even know why that song came to mind, for the record. I don't know. It just kind of popped into my head.
You're a huge Creed fan.
I'm such a huge Creed fan.
All of their albums.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Maybe it's because I was listening to it on the way home. It was on, the radio station. But anyways...
good cover.
Yeah. Because my second question is, what store is that, and how do I avoid that store? Because I will destroy that store. I'll just go in. I'll be trying stuff on. I'll be hopping out, doing the funky chicken with my pants around my ankles, so I'm trying to pull them up.
Very trendy.
Yeah.
I would say the store is probably the fashionable male.
The fashionable male from Mallrats?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Thank you. I'm please get this.
Please get this reference. I don't want to sound dated.
Is that where Ben Affleck worked?
Yes, it was.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't worry, we won't talk about anything that would make you feel uncomfortable, like, in the back of a
Volkswagen.
Volkswagen. Yeah.
Oh, Lord.